Hello everyone and welcome back to a Kerbal Space Program video. Today we have no build montage. We are already starting on the launch pad, and we are going to Mohole, and in particular the Mohole. This video was supposed to come out a couple of days ago. It was originally supposed to come out the day the shuttle video came out, and then I did the Minmus SSTO yesterday. And this video is coming out kind of late in the day, much later than I would usually put it out. But I said in a couple of my previous videos that I was having some trouble getting the fuel drain to work, and you'll see what I mean when we finish off this rocket and open up that fairing. You'll see what I mean. The fuel tank setup to minimize empty tank that we're carrying is rather complex. And so, to maximize the fuel to weight ratio, we have a lot of decoupling of tanks, which is a little bit of a problem with the fuel drains. We have a lot of fuel lines, and you can see there, a little bit, we have those peripheral tanks, but in between each one of those Mark III only liquid fuel tanks is a decoupler. So we'll drain it all off into the tank in front of it, decouple it, and slowly, and eventually we'll decouple all of those tanks. Here we go. You may have noticed we're already in orbit, actually, planning our maneuver node. I wouldn't really worry about a transfer window for Mohole. Just make sure that roughly your periaps lines up with the descending node, and you can get a pretty decent encounter. So you want your periaps of your orbit to roughly line up with your descending node for Mohole, and you can get a decent encounter. It should cost between 2,000 and 2,500 meters per second of delta V. But we are burning here. You may have noticed that we are in a rather high orbit, and that will unfortunately minimize the effects of the Oberth effect, which states that it is most efficient to burn closer to any large massive body like Kerbin. So if we were really trying to do this super efficiently, we'd do a lower orbit. But I didn't really want to split up the burns too much, and burning over a series of different burns, I'd have to edit the maneuver node constantly. But we can burn longer before and after our maneuver node if we're in a higher orbit. So that's why we're in a higher orbit. You can see me fiddling around with the tanks here. I was trying to get it to drain properly. This is one of the problems, and you can see there the decouplers with each Mark III tank, and we'll decouple them slowly, and eventually decouple all of them. So we were having problems with fuel drain. I use a mod called GPO Fuel Pump, and you can see me lowering the levels of the tank priority pump. So with GPO Fuel Pump, it just allows for easier fuel movement. You could do it all stock, but with the mod, it allows you to do it quicker. So you don't need the mod. It's definitely not essential for this mission, especially if you're not using a similar craft to mine. But I think that it is sort of just a quality of life mod. You could do it totally stock, but it would take a lot longer. So, why bother? So you can see me getting the maneuver node here. I deleted it, and then I'm remaking it because I burned too late. And we'll burn with those 4 nuclear engines, which, with this heavy of a craft, provide such a low thrust to weight ratio that it poses a little bit of a problem, especially near Mohole. So we can't burn really at periaps. We'll fly past Mohole, but we do eventually circularize, and this craft does have enough delta V. I think we come back to Kerbin with, something like over 1,000 meters per second of delta V, and there are a few inefficient, especially our return to Kerbin burn is less than efficient. So you could certainly do this with a smaller craft, but Mohole generally takes a lot of delta V. I wouldn't want to go to Mohole. Just getting to Mohole and circularizing around Mohole takes almost 5,000 delta V. So you can see me there with the maneuver node. We have an encounter. It's not a very big body, so it's relatively difficult to get an encounter, especially at the inclination it's at. So you really do want to get that periaps and your encounter lined up with that descending node, and you can see we almost have an encounter. We have those separation things, so we're going to create another maneuver node outside of Kerbin's sphere of influence, just so we don't have to worry about any encounters or the gravity of Kerbin messing with us. And we can go ahead and create one last maneuver node to get that encounter nice and squared away. So while I'm sort of fiddling around with maneuver nodes, and soon I'll be fiddling around with the tank drain rates again, I would like to touch on something. I made a new end screen, so you guys may have noticed in a couple of my other videos, or maybe not if you don't watch that long, that the end screen changed from a sort of badly made end screen to one of the Duna thumbnail, and I made another one. Usually when I make my end screens, I repurpose assets from old thumbnails, so this one is no different. I repurposed the cryovolcano thumbnail to make an end screen, but I think it turned out really good, so stay to the end, don't skip ahead, and let me know if you guys want a different end screen or something a little cooler. I kind of like how it turned out. And you can see me there decoupling that tank, and we'll slowly decouple those tanks one after the other just to save on the empty tank to fuel ratio, so we're maximizing our efficiency. We didn't need to do this, but it definitely made a difference, gave us way more delta V than we otherwise would have had if we didn't decouple these tanks. It does create a little bit of space debris. There's another one going, but it's whatever. They're insignificant, and we're launching them into highly interplanetary elliptical orbits. They're not going to pose any problems for us. So we have that Mohole encounter there, and we're just going to zoom in. We want a polar orbit because we are going to the Mohole, which of course is on the north pole of Mohole. We are going to go and descend to the bottom of the Mohole. We have a main lander that's going to land just outside the Mohole, and I would recommend getting a smaller lander that will descend to the depths of the Mohole, because doing it with a big lander is very difficult. So we wanted a smaller lander. It's in that cargo bay. Oh, off the graph now. It's in the cargo bay on the main lander itself. So here's a maneuver node. We're just going to just a few meters per second just to straighten out that encounter and get a decent polar encounter orbit, so we can line up and land at the Mohole. So you can see me fiddling around with the drainage of the tanks. It was sort of annoying, but it's not too big of a deal, and eventually we do end up decoupling it all, and we just have that main tank and the 4 nuclear engines, which provide decent thrust-to-weight ratio to get home, and we have plenty of delta V to get home after it. So this video is obviously a little bit late, that's an understatement, than when I wanted it to be out, but I was trying to come up with a better way with all this draining, and so it took a while. The tanks weren't draining right, it was having issues. I forgot batteries on the little mini lander, so the reaction wheel wouldn't work on one of the attempts. So this video has been quite a long process to make. That's why there's no build montage, because the build of this rocket and craft took place over the course of a few days. So all of the clips and everything, I didn't record certain bits, so I couldn't really piece together a coherent build montage, so that's why there isn't one. So here we are, and you can see we're burning retrograde way far out from our periapsis, but because of the thrust-to-weight ratio is so low on these nuclear engines, we can't burn just at periaps or closer to periaps, or we will be on escape trajectory and leave Mohole orbit. So, or leave Mohole's sphere of influence. So we're just gonna fly past that periaps, but don't worry, we will capture. Capturing with a low thrust-to-weight ratio craft at Mohole is kind of difficult. You can see those side tanks we have ditched, and we no longer have any tanks to ditch. And there we go, we've captured in Mohole orbit, so we want to raise our periaps. With Mohole, I'd recommend around 20 kilometer orbit. That's a decent height, you're not going to hit any mountains with that, and you can see some cool craters. I really like the Mohole design. It looks sort of lightly burnt and crisp, toasted. The craters sort of look like they've been burned with a torch, and I do really like the look of Mohole. So you can see our lander has left. It's only Valentina in it. We only brought Bill and Valentina on this mission. And Valentina is descending, and there is the Mohole. Now, a little history of the Mohole. It started as a terrain glitch, and you can see this area is not very flat, so we're going to end up flying to a different area to land. But back to what I was saying. The Mohole started as a terrain glitch, and then the developers decided, psych, it's not a bug, it's a feature. And they made it its own biome. So it is now a permanent feature of the game that won't be going anywhere anytime soon. So it's basically this 4.5 kilometer deep hole at the exact pole of Mohole. Oh, and you can see Valentina here flying out to this little lava river thingy from the Breaking Ground DLC, because I thought it would be a cool area to plant our flag. So anyway, it started out as a terrain glitch, but they decided to keep it as a permanent feature. It's 4.5 kilometers deep, and it gets very glitchy inside the Mohole. Couple of glitches. First off, you're at the exact pole of the planet, so the camera will flip around constantly. So there will be a few hard cuts when I'm reloading quick save. Here I put Valentina back in the lander can and got her out real quick just to replenish our EVA fuel in case we need it and there's an emergency and we have to. On a couple of attempts I did actually need to, but we did manage to get out with the lander, so it wasn't actually necessary. But it, as I said, started out as a terrain glitch, 4,500 meters deep, and it's very glitchy inside here. So you might notice the camera flipping around a little bit. Also, gravity works very strange inside the Mohole. Sometimes gravity will pull you to one of the walls, and so it sort of flips around the way gravity works. So it's very difficult to descend to the bowels of the Mohole. It also is sort of kraken bait at the very bottom. It's very likely that if you quick save at the bottom, your craft might get stuck inside the Mohole, inside the walls of the Mohole, and won't be able to get out. That happened on a couple of attempts ascending until I reloaded the quick save enough times to where it didn't instantly blow up or get stuck in the wall. So there we go, only descending for a short second, and I think we did lose one of our cubic octagonal struts on the side, but not a big deal. Yeah, we did. We lost that one cubic octagonal strut, but not a big deal. We can ascend throughout the Mohole. No reason to go down there, although it is kind of cool to see the bottom, and your camera view sort of clips through the sides. So we'll just very slowly land near our larger lander. I put those struts on the side just so it doesn't clip to the very bottom, because it will clip inside the walls of the Mohole and can be very hard to get out if you're clipped inside. So there we go. Valentina is trying to climb on, but failing a few times. And we are back in here in the main lander. We will ascend and dock with the mothership and go back to Kerbin, because Valentina misses home. So here we go, ascending. It's in a polar orbit, so leaving Mohole itself is sort of difficult to get a decent Kerbin encounter from Mohole. So we'll actually leave Mohole's sphere of influence before doing anything. But we launch at just about the perfect time to ascend to the mothership. And so we got a 3 kilometer separation, which is pretty good. We can pretty much instantly burn retrograde relative to the target and rendezvous with our mothership. So there we go. I'd recommend, if you want to rendezvous or dock together using SAS, set your the direction you're pointing to target when the docking nodes on each craft are set to the docking ports, and you will just slowly glide them together until you can dock together. So we're transferring Valentina and ditching the dead weight of the lander. We could have transferred the liquid fuel, but not necessary because we already have enough fuel. It's not super necessary. So here we are. This could have been way more efficient, but because we're in a polar orbit, we end up just burning straight out, not even worrying about anything, and we'll worry about getting a Kerbin encounter while we're in orbit of the sun. So here we go, and you can see it took a little bit of finagling. I skipped a year in advance here. I'd recommend pulling it out so your orbit crosses either the ascending or descending node of Kerbin when you're trying to return from any planet with an inclination. And you'll see sort of how we got the Mohole encounter. Just looking at that descending node is where we want to get that encounter, because that's when they're crossing on the correct inclination. So we tried for the ascending node, but couldn't get it, so I do end up switching back to the descending node to get that encounter. That is the most efficient place to get it, especially because our periapse on that side is closer to the sun, so we'll be going faster and be able to get a more efficient burn to encounter Kerbin. So you can see me playing around with the radial in and out and prograde and retrograde to try and get a decent encounter. We could not get a decent equatorial orbit of Kerbin, or we could have, rather, but I didn't, because we're not really trying. Because this isn't an SSTO, there's no need to land it on any particular part of Kerbin, although we do actually end up landing it fairly close to the Kerbal Space Center. We land it just off the coast of the west side of the continent that the Kerbal Space Center is at, so all things considered, it's relatively close. I'm sure they could fly a few helicopters out and rescue Valentina and Bill from that side of the continent. So here we are, completing that maneuver node with the little bit of Delta V that we have left. We have more than enough. We could we could probably go to Duna with that amount of Delta V, but we wouldn't be able to get back, so definitely don't want to do that. And here we are, just setting one last maneuver node to fine-tune our encounter with Kerbin. We don't want to do too low of a pass, so we aren't going to be circularizing. We're just going to straight go into the atmosphere. We don't want to do too low, because we'll burn up, because we are coming in at relatively high speeds. And we don't want to do too high, or else we'll just skim through the upper atmosphere and continue on our escape trajectory. So I would recommend, for coming back from Mohole, around a 30-kilometer orbit or periapse, and that way you won't burn up. I do think we would have had temperature gauges showing if I had them enabled, which I don't think I did. But you won't burn up, and you won't skim off the atmosphere, and you'll capture and land very fine. So here we go. We're going to decouple the rest of the craft and watch Valentina and Bill re-enter in their Mark III command pod. Finally, I remembered parachutes on this pod, so they don't have to jump out. And you can see we are actually going to be landing off the coast of the Africa-looking continent that the Kerbal Space Center is at. Open those parachutes and descend into the water. So that'll pretty much wrap up this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and give me any suggestions of where you guys want to go next. I don't really have any ideas for the next place to go, maybe Lathe or Ela, so just let me know, and thank you guys for watching. See ya.